There's a new Octoprint version out, and OctoPi is now at a stable 0.18 release, so let's check them out. Hello 3D printing people, Chris here, and yes, today we are going to be taking a look at OctoPi 0.18 and doing a multiple instance and multiple camera install, so you can use multiple Octoprints on one Raspberry Pi and use multiple cameras. And I've done a lot of videos like this, where I take some software and hack it to meet my own needs, just for entertainment value. And I don't want this to take away from the efforts that Gina and Guy have done with Octoprint and the OctoPi image. You should always use it as they intend for you to use it, and don't seek support for these crazy installs like I do here. Again, just for entertainment value. But it is kind of fun to me to make the software do things that it probably wasn't supposed to do in the first place. I just wanted to get that out there, and now we are going to do a ton of screen share, getting all this set up, and hopefully get everything working with multiple printers and multiple cameras. So let's jump right into it. So today for this video, I am going to be using a Raspberry Pi 3B Plus because I have a few of them. I'm using an 8 gig card. It is a number 10 card, so it's a little quicker than maybe the average card. That is recommended. And I'm using two Logitech C270 cameras. Now, the cameras you use on multi-installs, that's somewhat important when you buy one. Preferably you use ones that have serial numbers, and I can't really give you a list of the ones that do. I do know that C270s have them. There's also a pretty interesting hack you can do on these cameras with some 3D printed parts where you can focus them a lot better. So if you can, get devices that have serial numbers. That makes it a whole lot easier to tell the software how to tell them apart when you're using multiples. That's the same way with the printers as well. If you have a main board that has a serial, it's going to be a lot easier to use. But you'll see more of that as we go around the video. And I am also assuming that you have Octoprint already installed on your SD card. We're not going to run through that because the OctoPi install really hasn't changed much when you're using that image to create an SD card. I have a video for that, link in the description. Also, I'm just going to grab a couple of different printers when we get to the multiple printer section, just to show you how it all works. It really doesn't matter which printer you use, but remember, if it has a serial, that's going to be better. Also, if they're not the same type, it's going to be a little easier to use. 2 Ender 3s, they don't have serial numbers. That's going to be a bit tricky. I'll show you the tips that I know how to get them to work, but it's really not all that consistent. But we'll go through all that. So, let's boot up and get into Putty and check things out. So here we go. Here's our fresh Octoprint instance, the web interface. Remember, the install video will show you how to get all this stuff done, including how to use octopi.local, but you will need the IP for some of the steps that we're going to be doing today. A lot of this work is going to be done SSH. I like to use the Putty tool. There's a lot of great SSH tools out there, but I'm most comfortable with Putty, so that's what I'm going to be using. We're going to do a lot of line command stuff today. I also will have scripts that you can run that do all of this for you if you wish. But you might want to go line by line just to make sure you know how it's installed and how it works. So we're going to log in SSH to this instance. Default username is Pi and default password is Raspberry. So we're first going to tackle a multi-instance install, and I'm going to do 2 instances and 2 cameras for this video. Now the scripts actually do 4 instances, but I'll show you how to enable and disable those if you'd like to go that route. So let's just take a look at our home directory. We're just going to do an ls. We're looking for a .octoprint directory. That's where all our configurations are. And you can't see that because it's a hidden directory. So if you do ls-als, that'll show you everything and give you all the details. This is the directory we're looking for right here. And to make multi-Octoprint instances, we're just going to copy this directory. Again, we're only going to do 2 for this video. You can probably do as many as you want. I've personally never done more than 5. Multiple cameras, I usually like to stop at 3. That's just a reference. Go ahead and do whatever you want if you can get away with it. Also, this same install will work on the Pi 4. OctoPi 0.18 seems to work on pretty much any Pi now. They've corrected a lot of issues. So, whichever one you want to use, go for it. So we're going to copy this Octoprint instance. Don't use sudo on this one. We're just going to do a cp-r. That gets all the directories and subdirectories, everything in them. And we're going to use a fully qualified path just to make sure. We're going to do /home, /pi, that's the user, .octoprint, And we're just going to make a copy in the same directory, /home /pi .octoprint with the number 2 on the end. So now we've got our second Octoprint instance copied. I did want to mention also, a lot of times I will do update and upgrade for these Linux install, Raspbian installs before we get started. You shouldn't have to with this current version. They're pretty up to date, but it never hurts anything if that's what you like to do. Also, you can upgrade your Octoprint version. This is 1.5.2. There is a new one out, 1.5.3. But again, this install isn't going to impact it, as this is a pretty new version already. So let's continue on. Let's go ahead and take another look. Now that we have this copy made, ls-als, we have Octoprint 2, and it is owned by Pi, and it's in the group Pi, but it never hurts to go through and set it that way, just to make sure all the files and directories underneath it are set. You want everything to be owned by Pi in the group Pi. So we're going to do sudo chown -r, that gets everything, all the directories, all the files. We'll do pi, pi, and then our location, /home /pi, /.octoprint 2. Just to be sure all the permissions are correct. Anything sudo, you have to have your sudo password, and that is also Raspberry, if you haven't changed it. So we're good there. We've created all the files we need. Now let's jump to etc /systemd /system. We can do an ls in here. And what we're doing now is creating another service for our new Octoprint entry. This is the one that we have right now, the default one that you install. We're going to make a copy of that one so we can run 2. You can highlight on the screen and then right click to paste. But we're just going to copy this one, sudo cp for copy, paste that in there. We'll paste it in again, only this time we're going to call it Octoprint 2.service. Now we're going to edit some things in that Octoprint 2.service. So we'll do sudo nano Octoprint 2.service. So we just need to make it a little bit different than the first one. We're going to use a different port so that you can run multiples. You also have to run a new base directory. So for host, I'm going to take this one down to 0.0.0.0 rather than the local host at 127.0.0.1. It just works better if you set these to 0 and have the base one at 127. The base port for the initial instance is 5000. We're going to run 5001 for the second one. If you run multiples, just increment it, whatever port you'd like to use. And then down here on execute start, out here to the right, we're going to do -- base dir equals, then we're going to tell it our new base directory, the one that we just created over there in the home folder. So /home /pi /.octoprint 2, and that should be all we have to do in this file. Control X, Y, and enter to save. And that's pretty much it as far as getting the second instance started. Again, the more you make, the more you can start. We do have to enable it with systemctl so that it will start on reboot. So we're going to do sudo systemctl enable Octoprint 2. It's created our link, so now it'll start on reboot, and then you can just go ahead and start it. Just take out the enable and do start. Now if you head back to your browser, this is our initial entry at the main IP. It's on port 5000, forwarding to 80. We can just duplicate this tab, and then after your IP, you can enter the 5001, the new port that we put it on, and then you can log in to your second instance. It's going to be the same as the first one you created if you've been through the wizard already. If not, you'll have to go through the wizard. And now we have 2 Octoprint instances up and running. Now we want to configure 2 printers to work on separate Octoprint instances. And it's a bit of a process, but don't worry, we'll walk through it. So back to Putty. Now let's head to etc/udev/rules.d. We can take a look in here. We are going to create a new rules file, so we'll do sudo nano 99-usb.rules. This is where you can name the different devices that you plug in USB to your Pi or any Linux instance to something that you know, something that's easier to refer to it by, and this is how you tell them apart, so you can assign them to different instances. So I just pasted this line in here because it's rather long-winded, but we'll go through how it works. The subsystem is TTY, that's how we'll interact with the printers. The cameras will be a little different story. So you fill in these different attributes based on the printer that you're using and the main board it has. And some of these other attributes are to help you if you have multiple printers, but let's walk through that just a bit. So I've got my Prusa Mark III right here. I'm going to go ahead and plug it into my Pi USB. It is powered up. And then we're going to take a look at the log to see what happens when the Pi negotiates with that printer. So we'll go ahead and save this file for now because we have to gather a little bit more information. So Control-X, Y, enter to save. And let's take a look at what's in our messages log. So we're going to do cat to read it, /var/log/messages. And there's a bunch of errors in here. It's trying the webcam over and over. It tries to start it no matter what in case you plug one in later. But what we're interested in is this section right here where we plugged in the printer. Now on some printer boards, they're going to tell you the manufacturer of the printer, this line right here, as well as the serial number of that board right here. That makes it a lot easier to use this setup because you have these attributes to tell the printers apart. Not every manufacturer is going to do this. Also, a lot of main boards have the same ID vendor up here, as well as the same ID product. And if they're all the same, it's really hard to tell them apart and divide them up like this. But the Prusa machines, it's really easy. So now that we can scroll back and see this information, let's go back into our rules file, sudo nano 99usb.rules, and we're going to fill out some of this info because we just found it in the log. So my Prusa's ID vendor, we'll scroll back. It is 2C99. My ID product is 0002. So right here, we're going to do 2C99, ID product 0002. And as long as you don't have any other printers with that ID vendor and ID product, you wouldn't have to fill out anything else. Just to be extra safe, we can go ahead and add in the serial with this attributes serial. So we'll scroll back and grab that. That's this right here. Look for the line that says serial number. Not this one up here that has an equals on it. That's not going to work. This is the one you want. It should have a line all by itself. So we'll grab that, back to our file, and we'll paste it in right there. Now we're absolutely sure we're not going to have a different printer on that different instance. We'll know which one it is. And the sim link over here is the name you want to use. So let's call it Prusa MK3 for Mark III. These are case sensitive, so whatever you use here, you're going to have to use it in your other configuration options. And you notice right here, I pasted in this attribute called devpath. Now devpath is the USB number that you can use of that device while it's plugged in to a certain port. But if you change it to another port, and even sometimes on reboot, these are going to change. Only use this if you have to. This is only in the case that you have multiple printers that are the same machine. They all have the same ID vendor, ID product, or they don't have a serial number. This is a last resort setting that you would use. And if you want to use it, you can scroll back. This is the dev path number. So you can usually just leave the first number and hyphen off. you would just go with a 1.2. You have to look these up in the log because they're going to be different for every port. But if you wanted to use dev path, say you have a bunch of Ender 3s, come back to your file. The one you just plugged into that port, just put in 1.2, like that. You plug in the next one, it's going to be something like 1.4 or 1.3, and so on. But remember, if you have to do this, you can't swap around plugs. Probably you can't even shut the machines off. Things might change. This is a last-ditch effort. Just keep that in mind. We're not going to use this for anything else in this video. We're just going to go ahead and delete that attribute. And if you use my script, delete any attributes that you're not using. It just keeps things simpler, and it might help troubleshooting down the road if something isn't working correctly. So we're good on this one. Now I want to add a second printer. So I'm going to plug in my Prusa Mark II. So it's cabled up USB. I'm going to go ahead and save this file. I'm going to display messages one more time. You can see we plugged in the Mark II. You can see it's a Mark II right there. And we're going to repeat this process. We'll go to the rules file. I'm just going to copy this whole line because a lot of these attributes are going to be the same, but they will have different serials. We'll paste it right below. Scroll back and take a look. It is 2 Charlie 99. Its ID product is 1. We'll go ahead and grab the serial. Back to our file. ID product, change that to 1. We'll paste in our new serial, and we're going to call this one Prusa MK2 for Mark II. And that's everything you need to do for the printers. So Control X, Y, enter to save. And let's go ahead and reboot now that we have that information in there. Sudo reboot. When the reboot's complete, we're going to go back to the web UI for both our instances. We've got the first one here, and then the one over on 5001 over here. We need to add those port names that we just created with that symlink command in that rules file. So if you go to settings, on the serial connection tab over here on the left, additional serial ports, put in /dev, and then / whatever you called it with that symlink name. The first one we added was our Mark III, so remember it was caps, Prusa MK3, and we'll save it. And then let's go to the second instance, we'll update it the same way, settings, serial connection tab, /dev, /Prusa MK2 for our Mark II, and we'll hit save. Now we can reload, just hit the reload on your browser for both of these. Both our printers are plugged in, so up here in the serial port connection for your first instance, because that's where we just added it, you're going to have a Prusa Mark III if your printer is plugged in, which it is. We can go ahead and connect, and we are connected. You can pop that connection open back again. It's grayed out. We're connected at 11.5.200. So we're good on that one. We'll jump back to our second instance. We'll do the same thing. You should now have your port, our Mark II port right there. Just hit connect. And we're connected up, all set, receiving information, and you can now use these independently. Your plugins will be shared, but your G-code files will be independent. There is one setting I suggest you tweak when you're using multiple instances, and you only need to do it on the alternate ones, not the main one. Go into settings, go into server, and update your Octoprint service name so you're allowed to restart them individually. So the only thing you need to tweak is restart Octoprint. Just add the 2 here, or whatever instance you created. Whatever you called it when you created that service, update it here so you can use them. This gives you options in the power button to restart Octoprint, as well as when you run things like plugins that need to restart it, it's going to use this command. So save that. Also, back into settings, if you take a look at folders, it should go ahead and add that Octoprint 2 to all these folders that you've added, so it separates them out. But if you want to use the same folder, you can direct different things right here. So for instance, if you wanted to use the same folder for all your time lapses or uploads for some reason, you can change whichever folder that goes into, directories. Just some side tips. Also, if you want to update Octoprint, like we have an update out there for 1.5.3, you have to do them all individually. The easiest way to do it is to just come into software update for each one, and hit the update. Again, plugins will be shared, so if you install one, it's going to be on all of your instances. Just some side notes. But effectively now, these printers are ready to go. You can use them side by side simultaneously. They're separated well with serial numbers and those attributes, so they shouldn't get crossed. Sometimes the serial will get clogged and it picks the wrong one, but if you have all the right attributes like I showed you, and you have serial numbers and they are definitely different printers, it's not going to grab the wrong one on reboots or if you unplug a printer. It's going to work just like this. I would suggest that you avoid doing the auto connect at server startup, because sometimes when they're starting up it can grab the wrong one if one hasn't come in correctly. So just go through and connect them after you've started it up to make sure they're on the right port. So there's multiple printers, and in my opinion, from the past installs that I've done, it's a lot easier now than it used to be. Also, I will have a doc in the description below with a link to a script that you can run that will install 4 instances for you. And you can turn those off if you don't want to use all 4 so they don't use resources. So let me show you how to do that real quick. So say you've ran that script, you have 4 instances, but you only want to use 2 printers for now. I just install 4 by default because that's how many USB ports I had. You can just turn them off with that sysctl option. So we're back in, let's do sudo systemctl, and before we did enable, this time we're going to do disable. And we'll just do Octoprint 2. Now it has removed it from the startup, so now it won't start on reboot. So if you have 4 and you only want 2 printers, for example, just do disable on Octoprint 3 and Octoprint 4. That way it won't use the resources. That's the easiest way to be able to use the script without having to run all 4 if you don't want to. For now, I'm going to go ahead and enable Octoprint 2 to carry on with this video. Now that we've got the 2 printers up and running and you know how to control the different instances, turning them off and on and such, now we need a camera for each one of these, and here's where the real hacking and tweaking comes in. We have to change a lot to get this to work, and I actually don't use the configuration with the cameras. I just use the multiple printers. But it is possible, and I have been able to make it really consistent now. So let's jump into that piece. So the first thing we're going to do is let's take a look at the current webcamd service. That's the service that you use when you plug in a camera to Octoprint normally. So let's do sudo systemctl. We'll do status webcam D. We don't have a webcam plugged in. You can see it's exited right here, but this gives us information about that service, so we can build an additional one. And it is located in the same spot that we were in when we did the Octoprint service. We're going to pretty much do the same thing, only with the webcam D with a few added tweaks. So let's head to etc systemd system. We're just going to do cd, paste that in there. We'll take another look just like we did before. Here are our 2 Octoprint services that we created. Here's the webcam D service. So let's just make a copy of that. Sudo cp webcam D service. We'll paste it in again. webcamd2.service. And let's make some edits. Sudo nano webcamd2.service. So both of these are going to run out of root bin, the working directory. We don't have to change that. I do want to point them at different log files for the standard output and the errors. They both go to the same log. We're just going to change it from webcamd to webcamd2.log, 2.log, just so we can troubleshoot if we need to. Also, we're going to start it out of another root bin file. We're going to create another webcamd file. So we'll just call that 2 as well. So that's all we need to do for the service. We can Control X, Y, enter to save. And now we need to go create that root bin service. So let's jump over there, cd/root/bin. We can take a look. There is the webcamd file that we're after. Let's just make a copy of it. You probably want to save some of these as well in case you mess up. You don't want to have to reload the whole Octoprint just because you messed up one file. So let's just save a copy real quick to be safe. Let's do sudo cp webcamd, and we'll make a copy of it, webcamd.old. So this is the original one that we'll have in case something bad happens. Now let's make a copy of it into webcam D2. Now there are a couple things that we're going to have to change in both of these files. And I almost kind of feel bad because they've done a really good job helping you use your cameras with these webcam D services. It does a lot of things in there to try to keep you straight using multiple video options that you have. It's just how Linux works now with different attributes with the cameras and the streams that you can use. It's kind of all over the place. But again, this is a hack job only for your entertainment. So let's take a look at the original one. Sudo nano webcam D. So the fastest way to get you up and running in multiple camera mode, all of this for the initial instance is fine. In the other installs, we would have edited these. And you can see right here it says do not edit this. Well, for the most part, you don't want to edit this. You can use even multiple boot OctoPi text files, you can see one up here, to configure multiple instances if you want. But because of some of the smarts that they've put in this file, it's not going to meet what we need it to do. Down in here, it actually tries to figure out what your video number is. And if you look in that /dev, you can see video 0 through like video 13. So Octoprint is trying to tell which one you're using. So it's going to scan through all of them. And if you've declared one in your config file, it'll go for that. If not, it will pick the first one available. Again, there's a lot of smarts built into this file. They've done a great job, but I'm pretty much going to circumvent all of this. So in OctoPi 0.18, in this webcam D file, I'm going to line 167. And for the device name, video 0, I'm going to change that to the device that I'm going to call my camera. I'm going to do cam MK3. That's the camera that's going to be pointed at my Prusa. We're going to set that up in our rules file in a moment. And if you keep scrolling down, this is all the logic right here that tries to help you decide which camera you have plugged in and how it's going to use it. I'm circumventing this again, so I'm on line 265, again OctoPi 0.18. So it's going to try to start the video device. That device that I changed up top where it says cam MK3, that's a variable. So I'm just going to take video off and I'm just going to call the device directly. So pretty much everything that helps you decide in between here and there has been jumped over. I'm just calling that device the one we manually entered. So I'm going to Control X, Y, enter to save because we're done with this one. Then let's jump to webcam D2. There's a few more things we need to do inside here. The biggest one being the port number, because we can't use the same port for both cameras. So here on line 49, I'm just going to add in a -P inside these quotes, space, and a port number, 8081, because the default camera uses 8080, and then add a space. So that will let us use multiple cameras, different ports. They all have to have their own. And then we're going to scroll down and make the same changes we did on the first file. So line 167, we're going to call this one cam MK2 for our Mark II camera. And then back down to line 265. We're just going to take the video underscore off and call the device directly. Control X, Y, enter to save. And last but not least, we need to enable our new webcam D2 service. Just like we did for the printer, we'll do sudo systemctl enable webcam D2, and then we can go ahead and start it. But it will now start on every boot. We can take a look at it with status. It's up and listening on port 8081. If you do have errors with your webcams, remember they do have their own specific log files out in var. Let's just take a look real quick. ls/var/log. Here's your webcam 2 log, webcam log. All this information, like here in the service display, will be in these log files in case you need to do some troubleshooting. This is where it's going to be. So basically, I've jumped over a whole lot of the logic that they've tried to put in here to try to make this whole thing easier to use. And I don't necessarily want to do that, but again, this is a hacking and tweaking section. This isn't something I expect everyone to do. It's just if you want to get adventurous and try to mix this up a bit and use multiple cameras. So now we're going to get the cameras plugged in, try to tell them apart so we can use them on different printers. So let's do this one at a time. I've got my C270 here and my Mark III with a purple Benchy on it. Let's just plug that in USB along with our two printers. Now we only have one port open. Now that we have our first camera plugged in, let's take a look at the messages file just to see what happened. Let's do cat/var/log/messages. And you can see right here where we plugged in the camera, the dev path is 1.5. You can use these just like we did with the printers. These are the attributes you need. And my C270 has a serial number right here. Again, makes it very easy to use compared to ones that don't. So we're going to go to our USB rules file. So we'll change directory over to /etc/udev/rules.d. We'll take a look. We're going to edit that 99 USB rules that we had before. Sudo nano 99-usb.rules. And here we have our two printer configurations. Now we need to configure a couple of cameras. And again, we'll walk through this step by step on what all these attributes do. But it's pretty much the same thing as the printer. So we have ID vendor, ID product. If they're different on your cameras, you're going to have a lot better luck, or if you have a serial number. Notice this is a video for Linux rather than a TTY. So you can scroll back, get your ID vendor. Right here, 046D. We'll also need our ID product, which is 0825. ID vendor, ID product, 0825. And we can also add that attribute for serial. ATTRS, curly bracket, serial, curly bracket, equals, and in quotes, we'll put our serial number. And that's right here. And we'll paste it in, and make sure after every attribute you add, you have to have a comma. You can also use dev path here if you don't have serial numbers for your cameras. Again, you have to try to keep them in the same ports, don't move them around. It actually doesn't work all that well, but it's about your last alternative. Remember that is ATTRS, curly bracket, dev path, curly bracket, 2 equals, and then in quotes, you can put in that dev path number. For this one, it would be 1.5. All that's in your messages file. So it would look like this. But we're not going to use that because we're fortunate enough that we have cameras with serial numbers. So we'll take that out for now. There is one more attribute you need to add. And you have to add this because multiple streams can be done by a single device as far as Linux is concerned. We're only interested in the first one for both of these cameras. So we're going to do ATTR, curly bracket, index. Then curly bracket, equals, equals. And then in quotes, 0. Don't forget your comma. That way we tell it we want the default stream. Don't try to search for another one. This one only has one. And then in your symleak, we need to call it what we called it in the camera files that we created, those webcam D files. And our first one for our Mark III, we called it cam mk3. Remember, it's case sensitive. So we're good here. Now we're going to add our second camera for our Mark II. So let's just copy this line. I will plug in my Mark II cam to my USB port, the only port I have remaining. Then we can Control X, Y, enter to save this file for now. Let's spill out the messages file one more time. Cat var log messages. Here's the information for that new camera that we plugged in. Both of these are 270s, so it's going to be very similar as far as ID vendor and ID product. We're just going to have a different serial number. So we'll grab that. We'll head back in to our 99 rules file. All this is going to be the same except for the serial. We'll update that serial number. We are setting it an index of 0 because we want the 0 stream for both of these. It's both are going to be 0. Don't let that confuse you. And we call this one Cam MK2 for our Mark II. And that's all you should have to do in this file to get those separated out and working independently. So let's Control X, Y, enter to save. And let's do a reboot to pull everything in. Sudo reboot. And you could probably wait on that reboot if you wanted to until we made this last edit, but I am going to edit one more thing so that we can use the interfaces for the cameras. So I'm going to log back in, restart session, and we need to update our HA proxy configuration. That's what tells it where to go when you enter a certain URL on your web GUI. So we're going to do cd/etc/HA proxy, and then we're going to do sudo nano HA proxy.cfg to edit the configuration. This is also one that you might want to go ahead and make a copy of, so in case you mess something up, you can revert back to this one. Before we edit, let's go ahead and do that. You just do cp HA proxy.cfg. Let's just call it HA proxy.old. Now we have a copy for safekeeping. Now let's edit our HA proxy.cfg. So we need to update the front end. This is what tells it when you access a certain file path on the URL bar, which backend to use. This is the one for the standard webcam. We don't need to make any changes to that, but we're going to put in one for the other backend, the second webcam. And you'd have to have multiples of these if you had 4, 5, so on. But we'll paste that in there and we'll just make the updates. So use backend, we're going to use backend webcam 2. We're going to create the backend below. And then the path to access that backend, webcam 2. Then we need to create that backend, so we'll scroll down. You can see backend webcam right here. We're going to just copy this whole block, just highlight. We'll go down underneath and add a space and paste it in. Right click. We'll rename this one backend webcam 2. We're going to do /webcam2 to get into it. Keep the server webcam 1. Keep that the same name. It's going to be the same server name, but we're going to go to a different port. The new cam, as you saw before, is on port 8081. That's dictated in that webcam D2 file from root bin. But that's all the changes you need to make in here. Control X, Y, enter to save. One more reboot, and we should be in good shape. Sudo reboot. After the reboot's complete, we can jump back to our web UI. We'll go ahead and reload these. Our first instance right here, we are connected to our Mark III. You can verify that with connection. That's our port. And it's using the standard camera on port 8080, the default one. So if you go to Control, here's your camera. This is the C270 that we plugged in and set on our Mark III. It's pointed at a purple benchy. No updates are needed in the configuration to use this because it is the default camera. It's using that default port. The configuration should work just fine for this one. Now to add multiples onto other instances, we do need to make some updates. So let's go over to the second instance. You'll notice in Control, it has the default information here with the original webcam, so it's not working. So we need to go into Settings, go to Webcam Time-Lapse, and we need to make some updates. So we're going to have to direct it to the IP of this Raspberry Pi. So you will need to know that, like I said at the beginning of the video. So we need to do http:// the IP of this Pi, which is mine is 192.168.1.254. And then we're going to update webcam to webcam 2, like we saw in the HA proxy file. Down here for the snapshot URL, that port 8080, we just need to update that to 8081, so it knows what port to get that snapshot from. That local address right here should be fine. That should be the only update. And now if you hit test, you'll see our camera, although it's not positioned all that well, for our Mark II with our blue benchy. And time-lapse recording snapshot, you can hit test. There it is again. So we know both cams are working. Go ahead and hit save. Now you should be able to see your cameras on both instances from the Control tab, and they're assigned correctly. So there it is, multiple 3D printers, multiple cameras running on a single Raspberry Pi, and you're able to control them all with different instances of Octoprint, and we used OctoPi image 0.18. And this configuration works a lot better than the previous versions. This was a bit of a revisit video. But I've switched around all the USB plugs, rebooted the Pi multiple times, and it always comes back as I expect it to. No problems at all. And remember, we did hack and tweak our way through this. Octoprint isn't intended to be used this way. But if you're more of an adventurous Octoprint user, it might be fun for you to give it a try. Hopefully you found this interesting. That is it for today, and I'll see you very soon on the next one.